My name is Catherine Morrison, and this is the story of how I fell in love with the enemy, how I lost him, how I raised our daughter alone for 7 years believing he was dead, and how love, real, impossible, defiant love, found its way back to us against every odd. This is a story about courage and cowardice, about the choices we make when the world is burning, about a child who became the bridge between two broken people, and about how sometimes the heart knows truths that the mind cannot accept. I was 24 years old in the spring of 1944, working as a nurse in a field hospital near the French-German border. I had volunteered for the Army Nurse Corps 2 years earlier, after my fiancé was killed at Pearl Harbor. His name was Daniel, and we were supposed to be married in January 1942. Instead, I wore black to his funeral and signed up to serve 3 weeks later. I told myself I was honoring his memory, doing my part, being brave. The truth was simpler and more selfish. I needed to do something, anything, to feel less helpless, less destroyed by grief. The field hospital was chaos. We were stationed just behind the advancing front lines, close enough to hear artillery fire, close enough that we sometimes received wounded within minutes of them being hit. The work was brutal, endless, heartbreaking. Boys, and they were boys, so many of them barely 18, arrived with wounds that would haunt me forever. Missing limbs, shattered faces, injuries so catastrophic that death would have been kinder. We saved who we could and held the hands of those we couldn't, whispering lies about how they'd be fine, how the pain would stop soon, how their mothers would be proud. I was good at my job. I had steady hands and a calm demeanor that the doctors valued. I didn't flinch at blood or screaming, or the smell of gangrene and death that permeated everything. I had already died inside when Daniel was killed. What I did in that hospital was just going through the motions with a corpse that hadn't figured out it should stop moving. It was a cold April morning when they brought him in. Not to the hospital, to me specifically, to the small farmhouse where I was billeted with 3 other nurses. Marie, one of my roommates, woke me before dawn, shaking my shoulder urgently, whispering that I needed to come quickly, that there was an emergency. I followed her downstairs to find a man collapsed on our kitchen floor, bleeding heavily from wounds in his shoulder and leg. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow and rapid, and he was wearing a German uniform. My first instinct was to run, to alert the authorities, to have him arrested. He was the enemy. He was part of the force that had killed Daniel, that had started this war, that had brought so much suffering to the world. Every rational part of me said to turn him over to the MPs immediately, but Marie grabbed my arm. She told me in rapid whispers that she'd found him in the barn, that he was a deserter trying to reach Switzerland, that he was just a boy, terrified and dying. She had brought him inside because she couldn't let him bleed to death in the barn, but now she needed help. He needed a nurse. He needed me. I looked at the man on our floor more carefully. He was young, maybe 20 or 21, with blonde hair matted with sweat and blood. His face was pale, lips blue from shock and blood loss. He wasn't some Nazi monster. He was just a wounded soldier, human and fragile, and dying on my kitchen floor. I told Marie this was insane, that we could be court-martialed for harboring an enemy soldier, that we should report him immediately. She asked me one simple question. Can you really let another person die when you have the skills to save them? I couldn't. God help me, I couldn't. I had taken an oath to preserve life, to do no harm, to help the sick and wounded regardless of who they were. That oath didn't have an exception for enemies, so I knelt beside the German soldier and got to work. His wounds were serious but manageable. The shoulder injury was a through-and-through gunshot wound that had missed major arteries but shattered his clavicle. The leg wound was worse, a piece of shrapnel embedded deep in his thigh, close to the femoral artery. I worked by lamplight while Marie assisted, extracting the shrapnel, cleaning and suturing the wounds, administering sulfur powder to prevent infection, giving him morphine for the pain. It took 3 hours. By the time I finished, dawn was breaking and I was covered in his blood. He remained unconscious for 2 days. We hid him in the cellar, taking turns monitoring him, changing his bandages, forcing water between his lips when he was semi-conscious enough to swallow. The other nurses in our billet, Sarah and Joan, were horrified when they discovered what we'd done, but they didn't report us. We were all in it together now, complicit in harboring an enemy soldier. He woke fully on the third day. I was changing his bandages when his eyes opened. The bluest eyes I had ever seen, clear and frightened and confused. He said something in German that I didn't understand. I told him in English to stay quiet, that he was safe, that we had treated his wounds, but he needed to rest. He stared at me for a long moment, then said in heavily accented but clear English, "You are American nurse. Why you help me?" I didn't have a good answer. I still don't. I told him I was a nurse first, American second, and that I couldn't let anyone die if I could prevent it. It was a noble-sounding lie. The truth was more complicated. I had helped him because Marie had asked me to, because my oath demanded it, because I was tired of death and wanted to save someone for once, even if that someone was supposed to be my enemy. His name was Klaus Richter. He was 20 years old, from a small village near Munich. He had been conscripted at 18, given 6 weeks of training, and sent to the Western Front. He had killed men. He admitted this quietly, with shame in his voice, but he had never wanted to be a soldier, had never believed in the war. When his unit was decimated during a battle and the survivors ordered to retreat, he had made a choice. He had run the other way, toward the Allied lines, hoping to surrender or escape to neutral territory. He had been shot while crossing no man's land, had crawled for hours before collapsing in our barn. Over the following weeks, as Klaus recovered, we developed a routine. I would visit him in the cellar several times a day, checking his wounds, bringing food, talking. At first, our conversations were practical, how he was feeling, what he needed, when he might be strong enough to continue his journey to Switzerland. But gradually we began to talk about other things, our lives before the war, our families, our dreams for the future if we survived this nightmare. Klaus told me about his mother, who ran a bakery in their village. His father had died when Klaus was 12, and he had 3 younger sisters he had helped raise. He told me about the Bavaria countryside, about hiking in the Alps, about the simple joy of working in his mother's bakery, kneading dough and watching bread rise. He told me he had wanted to be a teacher, had been accepted to university before being conscripted. All those dreams had died when the war began. I told him about growing up in Vermont, about my father who was a country doctor, my mother who taught piano. I told him about Daniel, about the life we had planned, about the hole his death had left in my world. I told him about the guilt I felt, guilt for surviving when so many didn't, guilt for helping Klaus when good Americans were dying fighting his countrymen, guilt for enjoying our conversations when I should have hated him. Klaus said something then that I've never forgotten. He said that guilt was the price of staying human in an inhuman time, that if we stopped feeling guilty, it meant we had lost the part of ourselves worth saving. He said that helping each other, talking to each other, seeing each other as human, that was the only way to survive with our souls intact. I fell in love with him slowly, imperceptibly, like snow accumulating one flake at a time until suddenly the ground is covered and you can't remember when it started. I fell in love with his gentleness, his thoughtfulness, the way he looked at me like I was something precious. I fell in love with our conversations, the way we could talk for hours about everything and nothing. I fell in love with his hands, beautiful, gentle hands that should have been making bread, not holding rifles. I fell in love with his smile, rare but radiant, that transformed his solemn face into something luminous. I didn't recognize it as love at first. I told myself it was compassion, professional care, friendship born of unusual circumstances. But I was lying to myself. I knew I was in love the day he was strong enough to stand, when he took his first steps in weeks with my support, and the feeling of his arm around my shoulders felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. Klaus fell in love with me too. I saw it in the way his eyes followed me when I entered the cellar, in the way his face lit up when he heard my footsteps on the stairs, in the way he found excuses to touch my hand when I changed his bandages. But he said nothing, kept his feelings hidden, because what could possibly come of love between an American nurse and a German deserter? We existed in impossible circumstances. Love was a luxury we couldn't afford, except we couldn't stop ourselves. 2 months after Klaus arrived, on a warm June evening when the other nurses were at a dance on the base, I went to the cellar to check on him and found him sitting on the cot, looking at a photograph he had kept in his pocket. It was his mother and sisters, taken before the war, all of them smiling in the bakery. He was crying silently, and when I sat beside him to offer comfort, he turned to me, and all the barriers we had carefully maintained crumbled. He kissed me, or I kissed him. Later, we couldn't agree on who moved first, and it didn't matter. What mattered was that kissing him felt right in a way nothing had felt right since Daniel died. What mattered was that for the first time in years, I felt something other than grief and numbness. What mattered was that against all logic and reason and loyalty, I was falling in love with a German soldier in my cellar, and I didn't want to stop. We became lovers that summer. It was complicated and dangerous and completely irrational. Every moment together was stolen. Every touch weighted with the knowledge that we could be discovered at any time. Klaus should have been in a POW camp. I should have been doing my duty and reporting him. Instead, we were creating our own small world in that cellar, a world where the war didn't exist, where we were just Klaus and Catherine, two people who had found each other in the darkness. We talked about the future sometimes in the quiet hours late at night. Klaus would be healed enough to travel soon. He would make his way to Switzerland, find work, wait out the war in safety. Maybe I could join him after the war ended. Maybe we could build a life together in some neutral place where his accent wouldn't mark him as an enemy and my choice to love him wouldn't make me a traitor. They were beautiful fantasies, and we both knew they were impossible, but we needed them. Hope was all we had. I realized I was pregnant in August. I had missed 2 periods, was nauseous every morning, felt exhausted beyond what my work schedule could explain. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I was pregnant with a German soldier's child. If discovered, I would be dishonorably discharged at minimum, possibly court-martialed. The baby would be born out of wedlock, marked forever as the illegitimate child of an enemy soldier. And Klaus would be arrested, imprisoned, possibly executed depending on how the authorities chose to interpret his desertion and our relationship. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt a fierce joy I couldn't suppress. This baby was proof that love could exist even in hell, that something beautiful could grow from impossible circumstances. This baby was mine and Klaus's, a piece of both of us, a future I hadn't dared to imagine. When I told Klaus, he cried. He held me and cried and told me he loved me, loved our baby, would find a way to take care of us both. He said we would go to Switzerland together, that I would come with him, that we would raise our child in peace. I told him it was impossible, that I couldn't just disappear, that my absence would trigger an investigation that would endanger everyone who had helped him. He said he didn't care, that nothing mattered except keeping us safe. We argued for the first time that night. I told him the plan had always been for him to go alone, that adding me would make the journey more dangerous, more likely to fail. He said he wouldn't leave me, wouldn't abandon his child, wouldn't choose safety over responsibility. We went in circles for hours, both of us terrified, both of us desperately trying to find a solution that didn't exist. We decided he would go first, establish himself in Switzerland, then send for me. I would request a transfer stateside, claim family emergency, find a way to reach him once I was safely away from the military. It wasn't a good plan. It had 1,000 ways to fail, but it was the only plan we could imagine. Klaus left on a moonless night in September. We said goodbye in the cellar, holding each other, crying, making promises we had no way of keeping. He gave me the photograph of his family, said he wanted our child to know where they came from, to understand that they had a grandmother and aunts in Bavaria who would love them if we could ever be together. I gave him a small silver locket with my photograph inside, told him to keep it close to his heart, to remember me when he was safe. The last thing he said to me was, "Ich liebe dich, I love you." The last thing I said to him was, "Come back to me." Then he climbed out the cellar window and disappeared into the darkness, and I stood alone in that empty space, one hand on my belly, trying to believe I would see him again. I never did. Or rather, I didn't for 7 years, and by the time he returned, I had built an entire life on the assumption that he was dead. I learned what happened 2 weeks after he left. The Red Cross informed me that a Klaus Richter, German national, had been killed trying to cross into Switzerland. Shot by border guards, body identified, buried in a cemetery near Basel. The report was clinical, impersonal, the standard notification of enemy death. I didn't cry when I received the news. I couldn't. The grief was too massive, too complete. I had lost Daniel to war, and now I had lost Klaus. I had lost the only man I had loved since Daniel died, the father of my unborn child, my hope for any kind of future. And I couldn't even mourn him openly. Couldn't tell anyone what he had meant to me. Couldn't acknowledge the devastation tearing through my chest. I returned to the States in October 1944, claiming family illness, securing a stateside nursing position. I moved to a small town in Oregon where no one knew me, where I could disappear into anonymity. I told people I was a war widow, that my husband had been killed in Europe. It was close enough to the truth that the lie came easily. I gave birth to our daughter in March 1945, just weeks before Germany surrendered. I named her Anna Marie Morrison. Anna for Klaus's youngest sister, Marie for the friend who had brought Klaus to me, Morrison because I couldn't give her Klaus's name without revealing everything. She was beautiful. She had my dark hair but Klaus's blue eyes, his delicate features, his serious expression. Looking at her was like looking at him, and it broke my heart and healed it simultaneously. Raising Anna alone was the hardest thing I ever did. The war ended, soldiers came home to parades and celebrations and normal life, while I existed in a strange limbo, unable to fully grieve, unable to move forward, unable to explain to my daughter why she didn't have a father. I told her he had died before she was born, that he had been brave and kind and would have loved her more than anything. All of it true, none of it the full truth. I worked as a nurse in the local hospital, raised Anna, built a quiet life. I dated occasionally, never seriously. How could I? Every man I met was measured against Klaus and found wanting. I carried him with me every day, a ghost that never faded, a love that refused to die despite 7 years of trying to bury it. Anna grew up smart and curious and stubborn, asking constant questions about her father, about what he was like, about why we didn't have any pictures of him. I showed her the photograph Klaus had given me, his mother and sisters in the bakery, and told her these were her grandmother and aunts in Germany, that someday maybe we could find them, let them know Anna existed. It was a half-truth, leaving out that they didn't know Klaus had ever had a daughter, that finding them would require explaining everything, that I had no idea if they had even survived the war. Everything changed in August 1951. I was working an evening shift at the hospital when a man arrived in the emergency room. He had collapsed in town, severe chest pains, possible heart attack. I was assigned to his care, approaching the bed with my professional mask in place, ready to assess and treat. Then I saw his face, and my world stopped. It was Klaus, older, thinner, with new lines around his eyes and grey threading through his blonde hair, but unmistakably, impossibly Klaus. The man who had been dead for 7 years was lying in my emergency room, alive and breathing and staring at me with the same shocked recognition I felt. I don't remember the next few minutes clearly. I know I called for another nurse to take over. No, I left the emergency room. No, I stood in the hallway gasping for air while my mind tried to process the impossible. Klaus was alive. Klaus was here. Klaus had been alive for 7 years while I raised our daughter alone, grieving him, building my life around his absence. When I had control of myself, when I could move and think and function, I went back to his room. The other nurse had stabilized him. Not a heart attack, anxiety attack brought on by seeing me, apparently. And he was sitting up in bed, looking terrified and hopeful and devastated all at once. We couldn't talk there, not with other staff around, not with the risk of being overheard. I waited until my shift ended at midnight, then returned to his room. He was awake, waiting. When he saw me, he started crying. The story poured out of him in broken whispers. He had been shot crossing into Switzerland, yes, but not killed. The bullet had missed vital organs, and Swiss authorities had treated him and held him in a refugee camp. He had recovered, had tried repeatedly to send word to me, but his letters were never delivered. American military policy prohibited correspondence with enemy nationals. He had waited in Switzerland, trapped, unable to return to Germany and unable to reach me, hoping I would somehow find him. When the war ended, he had tried to come to America, but his German nationality made it nearly impossible. Former enemy nationals weren't welcome, weren't granted visas. He had spent 6 years navigating bureaucracy, working menial jobs, saving money. finally securing passage by accepting a work contract with a lumber company in Oregon. He had arrived in the States 3 days ago, intending to find me, to explain, to beg my forgiveness for the 7 years of silence. The chest pains that brought him to the hospital, they had started when he saw my name listed in the local phone book, when he realized I was here, so close, after 7 years of searching. The anxiety of finally finding me, the terror of how I might react, the desperate hope that I might still love him, it had overwhelmed his heart. I listened to all of this in silence, trying to process, trying to understand. He had been alive. All this time, all these years he had been alive and trying to reach me. I had mourned a ghost. I had raised our daughter alone unnecessarily. I had built my entire life on a false foundation. I should have been angry. I should have raged at him for not trying harder, for not finding a way to reach me sooner, for the 7 years of abandonment, even if it wasn't deliberate. But I couldn't summon anger. I was too overwhelmed by relief, by joy, by the impossible reality of him being alive. I told him about Anna, about our daughter who was 6 years old, who had his eyes and his smile, who asked about her father constantly. I watched his face crumble, watched him process that he had a child he'd never met, that he had missed 6 years of her life, that she had grown up without him. He asked if he could meet her. The question was tentative, terrified, as if he expected me to say no, to slam that door in his face. I told him yes, of course yes, but we needed to be careful. Anna thought her father was dead. Finding out he was alive would be shocking, potentially traumatic. We needed to introduce them gradually, gently, giving her time to adjust. We spent the next week planning, talking, rediscovering each other. Klaus stayed at a boarding house in town, and I would visit after Anna was asleep, and we would talk for hours. We had both changed in 7 years. I was harder, more guarded, scarred by single motherhood and loss. He was quieter, more solemn, carrying guilt for years of absence. But underneath the changes, we were still Klaus and Catherine, still the people who had fallen in love in a cellar, still connected by something that hadn't died, despite time and distance and grief. The love was still there. I felt it the first time he touched my hand, the first time we kissed again after 7 years, the first time he held me, and I remembered what it felt like to be held by someone who truly saw me. It was as if no time had passed at all, as if we were still young and desperate and stealing moments in the darkness. Except now we weren't young, weren't desperate, and didn't have to hide anymore. We decided to tell Anna together. We sat her down one afternoon and I explained that I had made a mistake, that her father hadn't died in the war, that he had been alive this whole time, but unable to reach us. She looked confused, frightened, overwhelmed. Then Klaus knelt in front of her, this man she'd never met, and said in his accented English that he was her papa, that he had loved her since before she was born, that he was so sorry he hadn't been there, but he would never leave again. Anna stared at him for a long moment. Then she looked at me, asking with her eyes if this was real, if she was allowed to believe this. I nodded, crying, and she launched herself at Klaus, wrapping her small arms around his neck, sobbing. He held her and cried too, and I watched my daughter meet her father for the first time, watched 7 years of absence try to compress into one moment, watched the beginning of healing I hadn't thought possible. It wasn't easy. Anna was angry sometimes, angry that he had been alive and not with us, angry that I had told her he was dead, angry at the unfairness of missing her first 6 years. Klaus was patient with her anger, accepting it as deserved, never making excuses. He told her stories about Germany, about her grandmother and aunts, about the bakery where he had grown up. He learned her favorite foods, her favorite stories, the games she liked to play. He showed up every day, consistent and patient, proving through action that he meant his promise to never leave again. Klaus and I married quietly 6 months later, making official what had been true for 7 years. It was a simple civil ceremony with Anna as our witness, the three of us standing together. Finally a family in truth, and not just in hope. I kept my name. Morrison had been Anna's name for 6 years, and changing it seemed like erasing that history. Klaus understood. He always understood. We had 2 more children in the years that followed. A son we named Daniel Klaus, honoring both the man I had lost and the man I had found, and another daughter we called Marie, for the friend who had brought Klaus to me all those years ago. Anna was an incredible big sister, fierce and protective and loving. She grew up bilingual, learning German from Klaus, traveling to Bavaria to meet the grandmother and aunts she had only known from a photograph. Klaus never fully shook the shadows of those years. He had nightmares sometimes, waking gasping and disoriented, reliving the border crossing where he'd been shot, the years of waiting and hoping, the terror that he'd lost us forever. I had my own shadows, the grief I had carried, the anger at the circumstances that had stolen 7 years from us, the guilt over choices made and not made. But we carried those shadows together, and that made them bearable. We built a good life in Oregon. Klaus worked in a bakery, fulfilling the dream he'd had as a boy, and eventually opened his own. I continued nursing, eventually becoming a nursing instructor at the local community college. We raised our children with stories of both joy and sorrow, teaching them that love could survive impossible circumstances, that family was worth fighting for, that enemies were just people who hadn't yet found common ground. Sanna grew up strong and confident, studying international relations, dedicating her career to conflict resolution and peace building. She said she wanted to make sure that no other children grew up separated from their parents by war, that no other love stories were interrupted by politics and hatred. She married a good man, gave us grandchildren, built a life that honored everything Klaus and I had survived to create. Klaus's mother lived long enough to meet all her grandchildren, to see Klaus happy and thriving, to tell him she forgave him for deserting, that she understood why he had run. She told me once, through tears, that I had saved her son's life twice, once by healing his wounds, and once by loving him when the world said I shouldn't. She thanked me for giving her grandchildren, for giving Klaus a reason to survive those terrible years of separation. I told her that Klaus had saved me too, in ways I couldn't fully articulate, by making me feel human again when I had thought that part of me died with Daniel. Klaus died in 2001 at the age of 77. His heart, weakened by that long-ago bullet and a lifetime of carrying trauma, finally gave out. I was with him at the end, holding his hand, telling him I loved him, thanking him for finding me, for coming back, for giving me 50 years of love and partnership and family. His last words were in German. Ich habe dich nie vergessen. I never forgot you, and I never forgot him either. I'm 81 years old now. Anna is 56, with grandchildren of her own. Daniel is 48, a teacher who inspires his students the way Klaus always inspired everyone who knew him. Marie is 45, a baker who runs the business Klaus built, continuing his legacy. And I am surrounded by family, by love, by proof that choosing compassion over hatred, love over loyalty to abstract principles, was the right choice despite the cost. People sometimes ask me if I regret loving Klaus, if I feel guilty for helping an enemy soldier, for betraying my country by falling in love with a German deserter. I tell them the truth. I regret the 7 years we lost. I regret that Anna grew up without her father for the first 6 years. I regret the pain and separation and grief that war inflicted on all of us. But I don't regret loving him. I don't regret choosing to save a wounded soldier rather than turning him over to authorities. I don't regret creating Anna, and through her the entire family that came after. Love was not the betrayal. War was the betrayal of humanity, of compassion, of everything good that people are capable of. Klaus was a deserter, a man who abandoned his uniform and his orders, and everything his country demanded of him. But he was also the bravest person I ever knew, because it takes more courage to refuse to fight than it does to follow orders. It takes more strength to run toward hope than to march toward death. It takes more character to choose love over duty when duty demands you hate. This is my story. This is our story. Mine and Klaus's and Anna's and the entire family that grew from one act of compassion on a cold April morning. I am Catherine Morrison, and I loved a German soldier in a cellar, lost him for 7 years, and built a lifetime on the foundation of that impossible love. And I would do it all again. Every choice, every risk, every moment of pain and separation and uncertainty, because that love gave me Anna. That love brought Klaus back to me. That love proved that human connection is stronger than war, that compassion transcends nationality, that the enemy is never just the enemy when you take the time to see them as human. The scars remain, The memories haunt me, but so does the love, and the love is stronger. It always was. It always will be. The end.